who owns the church? Let's look at it as we recap yesterday's sermon and then expand to the rest of our whole lives. In 1 Corinthians 3, Paul addresses the Corinthians with their divisions and, how they're trying to steer the church to this direction. The other ones are trying to steer the church into this direction. It's basically an issue of ownership. He says, "For when one says, I follow Paul, and another says, I follow Apollos, are you not being merely human," meaning following the culture of your world? "But then is Apollos. What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building." The emphasis there is on God. When Jesus talks about him starting the church, the only time in Matthew where he takes the word church into his mouth, he says, "I will build my church." And if it's his church, and if he says, "I will build it," that does not exclude us from building with him. That does not exclude us from watering or from planting. Of course not. But it means ultimately the responsibility of the church is on God. He has to look after it. The church is not just a religious club or like a non-profit that you can organize things. It's the bride of Christ. It's the community of the believers. God looks after it. He grows it. And that's so true for the story of the Corinthians. If you want to study this a little bit in Acts 18, the Corinthian church is actually a miraculous church because of how God grows it, how God builds it, how God brings the right people. Like the biggest surprise would be Sosthenes that ends up writing 1 Corinthians together with Paul. Well, the only other Sosthenes that could be from Corinth is the one that in Acts 18 wants to get Paul to jail, wants to bring to trial. And gets kicked by an angry mob, and it's like it's the person that would be the most resentful about Paul ends up being a co-author to the Corinthian church, and so that just speaks volumes of how God builds it in a way you could not make this up. Now, if God builds His church, if it's the community of believers is what He does, what He makes, well, then that's true for a lot of things in our lives, a lot of things that we think we have to own, we have to look after, we have to protect. God protects, God makes it grow, and God is truly the one who builds it. I mean, if you think of your breath, right? Breath is given to Adam, and by God blows breath into his lungs, and therefore he becomes a living being. And when people come to life, they get born, they get their breath, and it's a borrowed thing. You cannot hold your breath or you just pass out. And at some point you will have to hand back your breath to your maker. It's true. And so a lot of things, if we treat them as stewards, that's a biblical term for ownership, meaning God gives it to you freely to enjoy, freely to make, to work, to explore, to do all sorts of things. But ultimately, they come from God. What do you have that you haven't received, says Paul later on in 1 Corinthians. Meaning, He is the one who owns all things. The world is God's, and the fullness thereof belongs to Him. God owns things, and so that helps us to treat things, our wallets, the relationships that we have, as something that we will have to hand back at some point. You will not become a mother that holds onto her children and does not let them go into the world. You will not become a stingy person. You will not be fearful about the things that you're doing for God, because God ultimately looks after it. He's the one who owns everything, and we get to be stewards in His building, in His garden, which is amazing. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful week.